Good evening. Welcome once again to the weekly episode of Commander's Gridiron. I'm your host, Steve Lockman, where we talk all things on and off the field, Washington Commanders. And as we know, going through the offseason, coming into the beginning of the season, there is no shortage of stuff to talk about whatsoever. And as we know, going into this week, kind of had one of those games where it could have been the trap game, could have been, something that really tricked us up, especially going against Coach Bill Belichick, as always, and the Patriots. But, we came out with a W, which was pretty good. But one of the first things that we need to talk about going into this week was kind of the trade deadline fallout. As a lot of people know, and kind of to recap real quick, the Commanders were sellers. They definitely weren't buyers per se at the trade deadline last week. Which resulted in the Commanders getting rid of star defensive end, pass rushers Montez Sweat and Chase Young. As we know, kind of as I said, a quick recap, Montez Sweat was traded first to the Chicago Bears for a second-round draft pick in 2024. Likelihood of that draft pick being fairly high in the second round, which essentially becomes a end of the first round draft pick, is very good, right? Because the Bears aren't doing that great this year. So that could turn out to be a really good draft pick. And then later on in the day, right before the trade deadline, the Commanders ended up swapping off, I guess you could say, and getting rid of Chase Young, former number 2 overall pick, defensive rookie of the year, to the San Francisco 49ers. For a third round pick. And a lot of fans were kind of disappointed in the draft capital that was returned for those two gentlemen. However, with both of them not having any contract extensions, being free agents at the end of the season, and being able to walk away from the team with nothing in return, I would call both of those trades a success. And as the headline at the bottom says, the trade deadline fallout, what was the fallout of those two guys not playing? What it was actually a defensive unit this past week against the Patriots that did fairly well. And yes, they were playing the Patriots, a sub 500 team. Yes, they were playing Mac Jones, who has been dismal to not very good this season. And, it was something that, as shown throughout the past, when Sweat and Young weren't playing, the defensive unit was actually good or better than when those two guys were there. And it's definitely something that needed to be looked at and definitely something that needed to be noticed. And as Paul says, look, the return value is good for next year. Absolutely. With the draft capital that was obtained from these two guys being traded at the deadline this year, that gives the Commanders 5 picks basically in the top 100 for next year, which is outstanding because more than likely, let's be honest, Ron Rivera and company, along with Martin Mayhew and Martin Herney, are probably not going to be in the building next season. So for somebody that's coming in as a new head coach, new GM, to have 5 draft picks in the top 100, be the new head coach, have new ownership that wants to build around, a topic that we're going to talk about later on tonight as Sam Howell is the franchise quarterback. It kind of sets up those two power players within the organization for success in the long term. But one of the things that was kind of interesting, and I kind of made that headline as the deadline fallout, was, it was a 180-degree difference of what you saw in Montez Sweat and Chase Young leaving DC. And while I can't say I'm surprised in the grand scheme of things, I kind of am on some level, right? So Montez Sweat, as most players do that have been in a city or an organization for a couple of years or were drafted by that organization, whether it's a PR move, whether it's sincere, whether it's something they feel like they have to do, you name the list and see where the player falls into it. But a lot of players that leave town will pen a letter, whether it's on social media, whether it's on Instagram, X, Facebook, or the local newspaper, in this case the Washington Post. Montez Sweat put together, a long, kind of, hey, thanks for the ride. It's been a good time. I understand it's a business thing, blah, 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 blah. I'm moving on to Chicago. Conversely enough, Chase Young does nothing, doesn't address the media at all, doesn't pen a letter, doesn't pen a social media response. And in some cases, for the talk and rumor mill that was going around NFL insiders and local team media over the last week, that's kind of the way he's been over the last half season to even into the off season, going back even last year, that kind of led to him being traded, right? So it was interesting that the teams, because it wasn't quite, I guess, league official, even though the deadlines were made before the trade deadline, that certain players and coaches weren't accessible until basically, I guess, all the paperwork was done and cleared the league office at the end of the week. So, one of the things that was interesting was neither of those two individuals played this past weekend. It'll be interesting to see what happens with both of those guys going forward in Chicago and San Francisco, respectively. Montez Sweat was inked to a long-term deal. I think it was 4 years, 5 years, 98 million, with the possibility of going up to 105 million. There you go. As Paul, helped me out with some numbers here. How do I feel about, as soon as Sweat left, he signed that huge contract? Well, let's be honest that we knew going into this season, especially when they signed John Allen and Daron Payne to long-term contracts, both exceeding 70 and 80 million respectively, that there wasn't going to be much room within the team budget to sign Sweat and or Young long-term contracts, right? You can't go into a season with a quarter of your salary cap tied to three of your four front defensive four players, right? So good for him. He went and got the money. Personally, I don't think he's worth that much money. The reason I say that was, he's basically signing the amount of money that the Chicago Bears gave Khalil Mack a couple years ago. And then lo and behold, what was it? 2 years later, 2 seasons later, maybe even 3. I don't think it was even that long, that Khalil Mack ended up, going away from the Bears, getting some draft capital, and that was done. So I kind of honestly see that happening with Montez Sweat in Chicago. He'll probably have 1 or 2 good seasons, and then before we even get to the second half of that big contract, he's going to be going somewhere else. But one of the things that I found interesting was, not Chase Young came out yesterday in practice. He's actually donning number 92 out in San Francisco and not 99. But, Chase had his first chance to address the San Francisco media. Somebody asked him what it was like to be out there in San Francisco and be in that organization now as a result of his trade from the Commanders. And Chase Young said, look, I wasn't mad. He goes, nah, Nick Bosa's here. Boy's been a big brother to me. They played together at Ohio State, got drafted subsequent years. He's just stepping in here for today. I got here last week. And it's like, somebody asked, well, what do you notice that's different? And he said, just the culture. The vibe is a lot different. I definitely know that I'm in the building with winners, end quote. And that was definitely something that, whether it was a jab at the Commanders, whether it was how he truly felt, whatever the explanation was, it definitely kind of paints the picture of where he is versus where he was, right? So that, it's something that, look, we all know that the Commanders are, up until the end of the Snyder regime over the summer, were basically a completely dysfunctional team. And I can't discount, Chase Young feeling the way he felt over the last 2 to 3 years, especially getting injured, not being able to play for an entire season and then a season and a half, really. So, But let's be honest, San Francisco is a perennial contender, and when they build, and stack the roster kind of like the Eagles do year in, year out, and go to consistently make the playoffs and contend for that NFC title every year, I can definitely, you know, see how Chase Young feels that way. So then the question is, well, what happened as a result to the team from those two guys leaving? Look, what it did is it's going to end up giving us the opportunity to sign either more draft picks because we picked up the extra draft capital, or try to target some free agents for the first time in forever that we've been able to do this, mainly because of our former owner. That it's going to be interesting to see where the money's spent and how and why, and to fill the holes that we all know we have. Offensive line, linebackers. Are we going to try to get some more edge rushers? Whether it's one in free agency, build through our team and the practice squad, whatever. And, as Paul says, these will be Bieniemy's picks, his scheme, his picks, right? So that's kind of the leading thought right now, is that, is there going to be, is this Bieniemy's team next year? A lot of fans would like that to happen. I haven't seen anything, from Magic Johnson or the managing partners or even Josh Harris to kind of lean that way. But it'll be interesting going forward the rest of the season to see how we do, see how Sam Howell progresses, and kind of see whether or not Bieniemy gets that shot to be the head coach next year. And it's certainly interesting that the owners are being active. Apparently, the owners had a large hand in what was done at the trade deadline, and they've already begun to invest some money into the stadium itself on the short term, knowing that we're looking for a new stadium long term. And after today's announcement that the Denver Broncos are getting ready to spend $175 million on a new training facility, the question was raised by, one of the local Commander insiders, JP Finley, that, with Denver new owners last season, and then now here we are a season removed, that they are getting ready to build this great new training facility, if that's something that's going to be on the horizon for the Commanders. And I would like to think that that's a good possibility. Now, I get it. They just spent, a record for an NFL franchise at over $6 billion. But like I said, they were willing to pump a couple million. I think it was like 60 million into the stadium this year, to kind of band-aid it, so to speak, to get it to a couple years down the road till the lease runs out, that a new stadium can be built. But we all know that the training complex in Ashburn is pretty much garbage. It's been rated that way by players and reporters and everybody else in the annual NFL surveys year after year. So it wouldn't be shocking to see the NFL and the Commanders ownership group put some money in and kind of redesign next season, for basically 2025, a new training facility, which would be a godsend. Look, the bubble served its purpose. The offices, the weight room, that whole building hasn't changed as long as I can remember. And it's probably been that way since Dan Snyder bought the team in '94. So it'll be interesting to see what they do out there. But, every decision that they make from here on out, starting with the trade deadline, kind of has that ripple effect of rebuilding the team the way the new ownership group wants, and to be able to put the pieces together for the incoming coach and the GM to kind of put their mark on things, so that, hey, look, we're going to have a quarterback for you. We're going to have some draft capital for you. We're going to have a bunch of money in the tune of, right now, before restructuring any contracts, we're sitting at $92 million, with the potential that if they either release some individuals or restructure contracts, could go as high as 107 to 110 million for the upcoming season. So it'll be interesting to see where we go and what happens, right? So just something to keep an eye on, kind of off the field stuff that, ultimately will directly impact what happens on the field, not necessarily this season, but in 2024 and 2025. But as we all know, we came out after the kind of, I want to say heartbreaking loss, but I guess you could say the loss to the Eagles 2 weeks ago. Went up to Foxborough and took on the New England Patriots. And it was interesting that as the Commanders came out on top with a meager score of 20-17, and I feel like I was the only person on the NFC East War Room that picked my team to win. I'll throw that out right now. It wasn't by much. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't, a staggering win by any stretch of the imagination, but a win's a win, right? And one of the things that I found super interesting, and I didn't know this until after the game, was that Ron Rivera, and I probably would have banked on this as like my only reason for us to get the win against the Patriots. But Ron Rivera was 3-0 going into New England against Bill Belichick. So Ron Rivera has never lost to Bill Belichick, whether at home or away, which I found actually fascinating, knowing how good of a defensive guru Bill Belichick is and his team, especially against rookie and inexperienced quarterbacks, which is, let's be honest, which is what Sam Howell is. So, the score wasn't very good. The game wasn't very good. The refs were terrible. It had all the makings for, basically another Commanders loss. And it just showed some great resiliency between the team and, basically our ability to go up into an enemy territory, go against a great defensive coach, see how good our makeshift offensive line does, and see what the outcome becomes, right? So obviously, we go up into New England and, super quick. Joey Sly starts us off super good, accurate 37-yard field goal. With him, it's kind of hit or miss. He's going to miss a couple throughout the year. So far this year, knock on wood, he's been a lot better than what he was last season. So it kind of gives me promise going in as we go through the second half of the season that he's going to continue that streak and keep his good field goal percentage where it is. And, it kind of gives you some promise as that's always an option, right? Last season, I know that Ron Rivera and Scott Turner basically flipped a coin whether or not they wanted to kick a field goal or go for it or punt because they were unsure of the kicking situation. And as Out of the Box Sports says, hey, look, I was the lone wolf in the NFC East War Room. We do every Thursday night for all of you NFC East fans. There's a representative of each team from the Dallas Cowboys, the Philadelphia Eagles, the New York Giants, and then as well as myself. That covers all of our games, kind of talk a little preview, kind of talk a little recap, and kind of give some score predictions, right? And hey, Stacy, hello to you too tonight. And thank you. It was definitely a good win. It wasn't pretty, wasn't easy, but it's something that we needed to do just to try and, keep up. Look, we're not going to be divisional winners this year. We're probably not even going to catch the Cowboys for second place in a division, but we're still mathematically in the hunt for that wild card or one of the wild card spots, even if it's the last one. But, we picked up in the second quarter. It's kind of where the scoring decided to, hey, that's where we're going to start scoring some points and, start playing some football. And Brian Robinson, who has kind of been off the radar the last couple of weeks, actually got us started on the touchdown side of things with a 9-yard touchdown run to make it 10-0. So it's kind of good because for once we're not playing from behind. It gives EB the opportunity to not be as restrictive in play calling because we're not playing from behind. However, there's always that uneasiness that the defense is not going to be nearly as good as what it should be and, let teams back in. Then essentially we give up the lead and we're playing from behind. And, it's kind of been our mantra for the majority of the season. Right. But, as we know, the opposing team is going to get their points. I said that on the NFC East War Room show last Thursday that, look, we're not going to be shutting anybody out. We're not going to be holding people to 3 or 7 points. Like, we're going to be giving up 14, 17, 20 points a week, sometimes even more. And it's just going to be a matter of how our offense handles everything down the stretch and see what happens. And, sure enough, the Patriots come out, score back-to-back touchdowns, one of them being a 14-yard pass to Hunter Henry. And then, Stevenson with that long run, 64 yards. That was kind of a backbreaker and disheartening to see, mainly because, we had guys out of position. We had a couple missed tackles on that run, and then that dude just took off like a lightning bolt down the sideline, and that was all she wrote. But, then that's where the tide kind of turns, that now we're losing 14-10 at halftime. And one of the things that we've been fairly decent at this year was how we make adjustments and come out in the second half of the game to play our opponent, right? Sometimes we're good at that. Sometimes we absolutely suck. So it's interesting to see where, EB comes from, where JDR is, and just that aspect of, can they make the right adjustments? Can they make the right play calls? Is JDR going to be as aggressive in the second half as he was the first? One of his things that he's been knocked on a lot this year, and it kind of played in a little bit in the second half, was he doesn't blitz or isn't as aggressive in the second half as he is in the first half. And as a diehard fan and, show host, that drives me bonkers. I've always said, and I joke about it in our group text and everything and on our other shows, that, they go into a prevent, and the only thing that does is prevent you from winning. And it drives me absolutely batshit crazy that guys do that. And it's like, look, if you were blitzing one, blitzing two, staying in a certain defensive scheme, whether it was, man-to-man or, too high or shell or, whatever you were doing, like, keep doing that, because that's what put you in that position. Don't change up your entire defensive playing just because, you think you have the lead or whatever. And, the Patriots started off pretty good in the second half, that, they ended up kicking a field goal. Now they're up by a touchdown, 17-10. But lo and behold, Jahan Dotson, who's had butterfingers the last 2 weeks, came back, was able to solidify himself with a 33-yard touchdown pass right on the fingertips from Sam Howell to tie the game up 17-17. Here we are halfway through the third quarter. Holy shit, we got a nail biter at 17-17. Turn around, get some short field. Thank you to Mac Jones. And lo and behold, in the third quarter, then, we end up kicking a field goal to make it 20-17. And, as crazy as it sounds, for the last 2 minutes of the third quarter and all of the fourth quarter, there was no scoring whatsoever. And, I honestly thought that at that point in time, that's where the Commanders defense gives up a big play, whether it's a long reception, another long touchdown run, gives them, ends up playing soft coverage, and offenses will pick us apart going down the field, kick that field goal to win or tie, or even us giving up that late end of the game touchdown. And it was nice to see, the defense kind of buckle down and kind of come in and do what they need to do. Yes, it was the Patriots. I get that. The Patriots suck. Yes, Mac Jones isn't that great. His weapons aren't the greatest in the world. They don't really exploit them. It doesn't seem like they have an identity, yada, yada, yada. You can make the list. But one of the things that brought probably national attention for this game, and it wasn't the fact that the Commanders won. It wasn't the fact of the Commanders playing the Patriots. It was the fact of how bad the officiating was in this game. And there was no better, basically, man, what do you want to say? No better example of how piss poor it was than KJ Henry, who's a rookie this year and basically coming in as one of the starting edge rushers along with Casey Toohill to replace Montez Sweat and Chase Young. That young man came off the right side, came off the left side as you're facing the defense, and on the blind side of Mac Jones, came in, picture perfect hit and sack. Mac Jones still had the ball at the time, was actually about to go through his throwing motion, which resulted in a fumble. And actually the Commanders, I thought, and many other people thought, that they had actually recovered the fumble as a result of the sack. Lo and behold, the Zebras throw the yellow flag, and everybody's like, holy shit, what for? Was there pass interference, which gives them a first first down? Was there, illegal contact? Was there offsides? Yada, yada, yada. And, you know, lo and behold, here comes, I forget his first name, the referee, but his last name was Hill, who wasn't doing that bad of a job until, I mean, there were some bad calls, there were some missed calls, yada, yada, yada. But he threw the flag for roughing the passer on KJ Henry, which gave him 15 yards and a first down. And, Paul is absolutely right that since when is sacking a quarterback from behind a roughing the passer call? It's a fundamental tackle. Absolutely. I was beating my head against the coffee table when I saw that. And I was like, holy shit, like what is going on? And, even former head of officiating who was the I guess you want to say the broadcast referee, who kind of helps the commentators and the analysts do the game. Dean Blandino was like, look, he's like, that was a picture perfect sack. I don't know why they threw the flag. I don't know why they called a roughing the passer. And, it's something that should have never been thrown. And it's interesting. And, I had this discussion with Paul actually kind of during the game and afterwards, since he's a head coach of a football team himself, that, I shared a clip of a post that I'll, share with you guys here tonight. The officiating sometimes, I don't think it's every game. So I'm kind of interested to see how he was available to the media, or maybe they are to every game and I just don't notice it. But Hill, the head referee for the game against the Commanders and the Patriots, was actually asked by the media, can you walk us through that play when KJ Henry was called for roughing the passer against Mac Jones? What did you see? Was the call appropriate from what you saw? And, was it there to justify an actual roughing the passer? And Hill said, look, I was the calling official, and I called roughing the passer due to the full body weight of KJ Henry. The ruling on the field was that the defender came down with forcible contact, chest to chest, which I'll address in a second. He didn't perform one of those acts to remove most of that body weight, a gator roll or clear to the side when he was coming in. He came down directly with that force on the player, so the category was full body weight, which the NFL is really starting to stress right now this season with all of their officials, is that, if in fact the quarterback has already released the ball, or if it is in fact, coming together chest to chest, that, the defensive player doesn't basically drive the quarterback into the ground with all of his body weight on top. They want to look for that escape, what they call the gator roll, or kind of clearing to the side. No blows to the head, no blows to the face mask, that kind of deal. So it's super interesting. And, Hill continued further in his explanation, and he said, look, there are two common techniques. One we call the gator roll, that, if the player kind of rolls to the side, they land on their shoulders and kind of, gator roll, monkey roll out of it, then, they'll allow that. It's an acceptable quarterback sack or quarterback hit, right? Or the other one is that 90-degree rotation as he comes around to the side. He comes down, breaks the fall with the fist in the hands, knees, kind of like a crab fashion on top of the quarterback. So that way his weight's not on top. Either way, complete BS call, which for those of you that like to follow on X or Instagram, JJ Watt is great these last couple of weeks in the fact of him just venting as a former player the bad calls that the referees are throwing out there, whether it's roughing the passer, whether it's defensive pass interference, whether it's, anything else that goes on. And, basically guys are getting fined, losing their paychecks, so in some cases getting suspended for calls that are completely bogus. And, I couldn't agree with Paul more that, look, the referees need to be accountable on missed or bogus calls. And, it's coming to the point now where not only does the NFL need to hold the referees accountable for what they're doing, but also allow the coaches to make that a reviewable call with one of their coaches' challenge. So, look, we're not advocating, we expand the challenges in number. We're not, anything like that. We're just asking that the umbrella for challenges moving forward also encompasses, what a coaching staff believes to be a bullshit penalty, and if that is the case, as Paul says, forward weight movement, then ban the forward progress on the play. They should have blown the whistle, and they never blew the whistle until actually I think it was Deron Payne, got up from the pile and he's holding the football. And it was super interesting because I think it was either the next play, which, the Patriots maintained the possession, or 2 plays later. I think it was the very next play. Mac Jones underthrew the ball, and they never called offensive pass interference on the guy who tackled Emmanuel Forbes trying to get an interception. So, there's basically 2 plays in a row that the referees, bogusly threw a penalty flag and then subsequently didn't throw a penalty flag for what should have been offensive pass interference. But overall, it was still a productive game. The team came out, still put up 432 total yards of offense, which for us is still good, right? When we can hit that 400 mark, which on the average is 300 yards passing, 100 yards rushing. And as we break it down here in a second, was kind of the case. It kind of helps us get that recipe for a victory, right? So even though, we did give up the Patriots are the Patriots, we gave up 327 total yards. As I said, Sam Howell came out 308 of those total yards out of that 432 was passing to 124 yards rushing. Look, once again, we did fairly well. We kept the opposing team around 100 yards rushing, and the Patriots got 107 with 220 yards passing. And it was interesting because, we didn't know what Mac Jones we're going to get. We're going to get the Mac Jones that turns the ball over, isn't very good in progressions, can't really make decisions on his feet. Or are we going to get a kid that we're going to give up 4 touchdowns to, minimal turnovers, yada, yada, yada. And we got the latter, right? So I got to be honest that, we did fairly better. It wasn't as good as what we needed to, but our third down efficiency wasn't bad. We were about 50% at 9 out of 17, and I think the bigger number going in, here we are 2 weeks removed from making changes on the offensive line, which has been huge for us, that we only gave up 3 sacks, and when we looked at the preview last week going into it, one of the things that we were, highly concerned about was, what is Bill Belichick going to do? The defensive guru who loves to feast on first-year quarterbacks, rookie quarterbacks, inexperienced second, third-year guys that, came, from other teams, coming off the practice squad, whatever. So last week when we only give up 2 sacks, to this week we only gave up 3, that is leaps and bounds from where we were in the first half of the season, giving up 6, 7, 9, sacks a game. Like, that is huge, right? So it's definitely something that, we'd love to see as we're making those progressions going forward. And, once again, look, we had 2 turnovers. We fumbled the ball and lost it. We had 1 interception by Sam Howell, but it didn't ultimately come to kill us in the grand scheme of things. So, it works out in the long run for us to help us get that W. Time of possession is huge for us. And it's one of the things that, we use time of possession as kind of like a guiding tool for our team in, look, it's kind of, break it down to be simple, right? The longer we control the ball, the less the other team's offense is going to be on the field. And a lot of times in some of the bigger games, that wasn't always necessarily the case, right? Because our defense was always on the field, or our offense was always doing 3 and outs. The offense was throwing interceptions, was fumbling the ball, whatever, so that it was either 50-50 in time of possession or we were losing that time of possession. But this past week against New England, we had 37 minutes, out of 60 in time of possession. So that was absolutely huge for us, right? And one of the things that, helped us, be huge this week is, once again, Sam Howell is coming into his own. And, when Sam Howell, I don't necessarily like how many times we're passing the ball. I would rather like us to be a little bit more balanced in that offense between rushing and running. But, I got to give credit where Sam is doing great that, Sam Howell went 29 for 45 for 325 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, minimizing the turnovers, and only took 3 sacks. Now, he was hurried a good bit. And, look, let's be honest. He was slinging that rock. He was putting the ball into some spots that he had no business putting it into, but it worked out in the long run for us. They didn't, there were no interceptions. Our wide receivers were able to make that catch, and it's something that we're going to dig into a little bit, more here later on tonight to kind of see where things go. But, overall, I think it was a really good game by Sam Howell, and real quick, kind of circling back to the roughing the passer call, because even Sam Howell has kind of been kind of victimized to it when there's not really any flags thrown before, right? Is that, look, it's a quarterback safety league. And we all know that the NFL wants to minimize the impacts of injury, to players so that, they're going to, quote unquote, coddle quarterbacks. But, they got to get it right too. So there is that fine line. So as we know, looking at the Patriots Commanders game, look, Hal had yet another great game. Let's call it very good to a great game. Stringing these things along is what Sam Howell needs. Having those good, back-to-back 300-yard games is what Sam Howell needs to do. It gets him more familiar with the offense. EB's able to build on that week after week, and it's going great. Point number 2 for this past game, Emmanuel Forbes and Quan Martin balled out. Look, I get it. It's the New England Patriots. It's Mac Jones. It's Juju Smith-Schuster. It's Hunter Henry and probably a bunch of other scrubs that I don't even know. But, we needed these guys to have a big game. Were they going up against, grade A, NFL elite, offensive skilled players? No. But they did what they needed to do to build their confidence to keep going week to week, because next week they're going to have a hard matchup in the Seattle Seahawks, right? Going up against TJ Lockett, going up against, Metcalf and, that stellar offensive scheme with Geno Smith that we're going to talk about in a couple minutes. It's, that's what they need. They need that confidence, especially Emmanuel Forbes. Look, as we just addressed it for a solid 5 minutes, the officials were trying as hard as they could to keep New England in the game, especially with bullshit calls or non-calls. But we were able to overcome that and keep going. B-Rob is super fun to watch. That powerhouse, north and south running back. Throw in some Gibson to mix it up. And look, when they don't fumble, they're great to watch. It's a great combination. Sprinkle in a little Rodriguez too for 4 to 5 touches a game as well. And we got a good group of running backs in the backfield. Would love to see him use that a little bit more. Maybe that helps Sam Howell in the long run so that he doesn't have to pass 45 times. Maybe it helps open up the passing game a little bit better, helps keep the defense on their toes, make us a little more unpredictable, et cetera, et cetera. We'll see how it goes in the second half of the season. Look, defensively, and especially special teams, they all came together for the first time in a long time. One of the things, and I'll throw a game ball at Jamison Crowder. He was on the team a couple years ago, was okay to average, but we signed him back again this offseason at the very beginning of the season. And he's been electric on special teams, especially as a punt returner. But then he also comes in as like that X wide receiver, third down wide receiver, slot receiver, where he fits in pretty nice. He's going to get you a couple catches a game. But like I said, I think his true value, and it's showing already, is on the punt return side of things. And when you have somebody back there to catch punts that isn't going to fair catch every single punt or only give you, 5-yard return, it's such a relief as an offense. Hey, look, where he has the potential to catch the ball and where he ends up is at least going to be 10 yards further or more. And, Jamison Crowder's come in doing what he's doing, and I got to give the guy props, right? Dotson had a drop in this game, but he definitely rebounded with, following that up with that beautiful finger touch, touchdown grab for like 32 yards. And I alluded to it earlier, he's been the hands guy for the last season and a half. but the last couple of weeks he's been butterfingers. Whether or not that is on him, whether or not it's on Sam Howell throwing slightly behind him a couple times like it was in the Eagles game, whatever that combination is, it's nice to see that connection is there again. And Jahan Dotson is doing what he needs to do and catching that ball to get us some points on the board. Look, Sam Howell doesn't have a particularly favorite wide receiver. He'll throw it out there that a lot of times he prefers Terry McLaurin, wide receiver number 1, Jahan Dotson number 2. But we all know that Sam Howell spreads the ball around, and that's one of the things that we see as part of the EB offense coming from Kansas City, is that the ball gets distributed around a lot. And that was the case against the Patriots, where Sam Howell threw to 9 different guys, which, as nice as it is to see that on offense, it's great to see that for against the team's defense, because they don't know where you're targeting. It's not like you only have 2 guys that are going to be catching the ball, whether it's a wide receiver and a tight end, or, a slot guy and wide receiver or whatever. You literally don't know where Sam Howell's going to throw the ball from down to down. So it's nice to see that is there. As we alluded to, the offensive line is playing a lot better. Only gave up 3 sacks this game. And, I can honestly say that is attributed to one of the big factors is having Tyler Larsen starting at center. And, with the Commanders starting Larsen at center, the Commanders are 7-2-1 with him there. So unless he gets hurt or something happens, that we regress, which I don't necessarily see, Larsen's going to be that starting guy moving forward, especially now that they put Stromberg on IR, which basically takes him out for the next 4 weeks, but essentially his season's going to be done anyhow. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And like I said, kind of starting off the things, whether we like it or not, whether it's a goal that we want to have, even though our goal is to go deep into the playoffs, we're still in the thick of things for the NFC playoff run. If we can string a couple wins here and there with the luck that some of our other opponents have had so far this season, it's certainly a possibility that, look, with a 17-game schedule, if you can do 500, you have a legitimate shot at making the playoffs. Paul chimes in, hey, look, I believe that 8 to 9 wins this year is a wild card in the NFC. There's a very good possibility that if we can reach that 8-game plateau, or even 9 with a little bit of luck here and there, the NFC East can easily put 3 teams back in the playoff picture for the second year in a row. And that would be huge, right? So, but one of the things it's going to be, we know looking forward to next week, we play the Seattle Seahawks. But before we preview the Seattle Seahawks game, let's take a quick break. Listen from our sponsors that we have every week here at Out of the Box Sports Network. Starting off with Monkey Cult Coffee. And Monkey Cult Coffee has their newest blend, the Organic Blend Peru La Florida. So log on to monkeycultcoffee.com. Use that promo code OOTB Sports for your discount. Not only do they have the organic blend, but they have the bourbon chocolate chip, the toasted coconut rum, the Sumatran blend, and all of your coffee cup, apparel, and shaker needs that you need. So jump onto the website and use that promo code OOTB Sports at monkeycultcoffee.com for your discount and get one of the new 4 flavors that they have. Last but not least, slips and falls, workman comp, personal injury claims. Whether you're battling at an opponent, NFC East team's enemy territory and get hurt, give that guy a call at 1-800-HURT-123. He has 3 convenient office locations, one in Philadelphia, one in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, one in Pittsburgh, PA. And that guarantee that Jason Fine, a.k.a. Attorney Big Al, will take care of you with whatever you need. All right. As we kind of look at the second half of tonight's show, we got 2 more topics to talk about. The first of which, is basically we're on the road traveling out to the West Coast into hostile territory to the Seattle Seahawks. And it's kind of interesting because Pete Carroll is one of those guys who's been around forever. I think he has the second longest tenure to like Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh, and probably Jim John Harbaugh in Baltimore, that whatever it is, Pete Carroll is able to assemble a very competitive team season in, season out. Look, we know Seattle is not the team of, the Legion of Boom as they were a couple years ago, but they're still super competitive. And Pete Carroll, like I said, just has a way of being able to put those guys together in that awesome stadium environment out there in Seattle, where it's super loud, super raucous. And, a home game for them is basically like having an extra player on their team, kind of like going into Arrowhead. And, it's definitely an uphill challenge. It's definitely going to be a lot more competitive than what it was going to Foxborough this past Sunday, playing the New England Patriots. Excuse me. But one of the things that kind of concerns me is which Seahawks are we going to get this coming week? Are we going to get the one that is the potential for a strong run into the playoffs coming out of the NFC West, along with the San Francisco 49ers? Or are we going to get the Seahawks that just went to Baltimore and dropped a goose egg and, probably shit the bed and lost to the Baltimore Ravens 37-3? Now look, I get it. Baltimore is running deep into the playoffs along with the Cincinnati Bengals in the AFC North. So the Baltimore Ravens are a really good team this year. But I kind of thought that Seattle was on the same level as Baltimore was this year. And to watch them go into Baltimore and get basically drubbed 37-3, kind of like what we did against Buffalo earlier this season, it's super interesting to see what Seattle Seahawks team we're going to get. And as I'm just reminded there at the bottom, Pete Carroll is in his 13th year as head coach. And wow, look at that statistic. He's made the playoffs 10 out of 13 years. And, that's basically what you want in a head coach, to deliver an annual playoff contending team. Now obviously a lot of times they get bounced in the wild card round. Sometimes they get bounced in the divisional round. They don't necessarily make it deep into the NFC title game, but they're in the conversation. They're in the picture. And that's what that's better than half the NFC teams to begin with. So, we know they're going to be a tough competition. And, maybe we can take a page out of the Baltimore Ravens book from this past Sunday to figure out how we're going to play the Seattle Seahawks, right? So the Baltimore Ravens held Geno Smith to 157 yards passing. And, it's kind of interesting because Geno Smith is a mobile quarterback. Washington doesn't do well with mobile quarterbacks. When we faced Jalen Hurts twice this season, when we faced Tyrod Taylor, when we faced Josh Allen, Josh Dobbs in Arizona, and the quarterback from Denver, we don't do well against mobile quarterbacks, but the Ravens were able to kind of exploit that and hold Geno Smith to 151 yards passing, which is huge for us. But furthermore, I think what is even just as shocking that, they held Seattle Seahawks to 3 points on 151 total yards, but the Ravens were able to put up over 500 yards of offense. So, does that give me some optimism that Sam Howell is going to have another 300-yard passing game, another 100 yards of rushing? Well, holy shit, right there's a little over 400 yards of total offense. We're not far from putting together another 100 yards like the Baltimore Ravens did against the Seattle Seahawks. Now, keep in mind, this game was in Baltimore. It was not in Seattle with the home crowd, which is super ruckus, as they kind of call it, the 12th man, right? As you see at the bottom of your screen. I get it. It's when you go into certain stadiums, the whole dynamic of that game changes, right? So when you think of that, you think of, Lincoln Financial, you think of Arizona Cardinals, who led the league for so many years in offense or in basically illegal procedures and illegal motions, for years and years, kind of going into Arrowhead, going into Seattle Seahawks Stadium up there in Seattle in the Great Northwest. So I would not be surprised if you see a different Seattle team coming out this week than what they had last week. Seattle Seahawks were horrible on third downs against the Ravens. They were only 1 for 12. They were 0 for 1 on fourth down. They only ran 47 total plays, which might be the mantra of the Commanders this week as we battle the Seattle Seahawks, right? Kind of goes back to that time of possession. Can we maintain the ball, our secondary, limit the big plays? Are we going to put Emmanuel Forbes on, Metcalf or Lockett to basically is it going to be like AJ Brown, 2.0 again? Like we don't know. We don't know what they're going to do. Seahawks had a bunch of penalties. They only had 6 penalties, but in the grand scheme of things, when you're playing against teams that are good enough that literally only get like 3 or less, that becomes a huge thing, right? One of the things that we might have to do to combat going into the 12th man, as Paul says, look, you might have to go to that silent snap count this week, right? And whether it's silent snap counts, whether it's quick snap counts, whether it's quick releases like we had to do against Philadelphia after giving up a ton of sacks. And it might be playing more up tempo. It might be no huddle offenses, not allowing their defense to make substitutions, yada yada yada. It's definitely going to have to be a week of big preparation to kind of see where we go against the Seattle Seahawks. And, I kind of, for the way we're playing, stringing along good games, even though our defense hasn't necessarily been the greatest, I see us continually doing well offensively to keep getting better. And, as Paul says, he agrees wholeheartedly. Back to that discussion, that home field advantage is Philly, Kansas City, and Seattle. It's insane to the point that I know certain teams, and I wouldn't be surprised if Washington does this week. But I know Minnesota did it 2 weeks ago. I forget who they were playing, but they were pumping in crowd noise inside the dome during practice. They were playing loud music like AC/DC and shit like that to basically while they were playing to combat how the offenses were communicating to dig out from what is typically known as your offensive production and how we do snap counts, how we communicate plays and audibles and different signals and stuff like that. So it'll definitely be interesting. I hope our team can do that. I know they had yesterday and today off, so tomorrow is the first solid day of practice going into this week against Seattle, but I think our guys are going to be ready. And, when you can at least have a week of victory going into a game, it definitely helps your mindset, definitely helps your thought process and just the overall vibe of the team going into that following week. The shitty part is we're flying all the way out to the West Coast, so it'll be interesting to see how we do with that because typically we don't do very well. But, this is our chance and this is where we're going to need it to string along a couple wins. So we pick up a win against last week against the Patriots. We need a win this week against Seattle. We need a win against the Giants next week. And then, by the way, going into Thanksgiving, we play the Dallas Cowboys. So, these 3 weeks that we're in the middle of right now are huge for our season because we have a couple of really tough games coming up in no particular order. Dallas, Miami, San Francisco bye week, and then like Dallas again or something like that. So obviously our big game, not to look too far ahead, is Thanksgiving Day, where Paul and I and Dave will be talking a bunch of shit to each other throughout all week, but that's neither here nor there. So we'll see what happens, right? But I honestly think that we have the potential for the way we've been playing to go into Seattle and pull off a victory. It's probably, as much as I hate to say this, going to be another score just like the Patriots was. So I think the Commanders are going to go into Seattle against Geno Smith. We're going to be able to kind of do what the Baltimore Ravens have been able to do. And EB is going to dial up a winning game plan. And we're probably going to win somewhere around like 24-17. It's not going to be some big shootout. It's going to be a, field position, time of possession, basically ball game, right? And God forbid, it's probably going to come down to a last, 1 minute of the game, heart attack for me as a fan, whether or not we hold on, whether or not we score, yada, yada, yada. But I think the Commanders have the potential and a good possibility and the ability to go into Seattle and sneak out with another victory. And before we wrap up tonight, one of the things that was kind of interesting over the last week is a lot of talk has come out, especially because of the trade deadline, especially because of the way he's been racking up stats and, I don't want to say starts, but, just the way he's been doing is Sam Howell. And, Paul chimes in, hey, look, he thinks my team's going to lose again. Sorry, you're not calling the 2 games right in a row, 2 weeks in a row as the lone wolf. He's going to say that Seattle's going to win 27-16. It's a very good possibility that it could end up playing that way, but look, there's only a few teams in the league that I know going into the game that we're probably not going to win, but Seattle's not one of them, right? Going into the Eagles game, even though we got super close both times and we should have won both times, I kind of knew going into the season that we probably weren't going to win those games. But Seattle is one of those games where we should win. And, if we need to kind of have a decent season or even have a shot at making the playoffs, this is a game that we need to win. But Sam Howell kind of solidified the mantra and the notation that, the big question being asked around this week is Sam Howell the franchise quarterback moving forward of the Washington Commanders? And it was super interesting because Josh Harris came out and basically, in no direct terms, came out and said, hey, look, the decisions that we made on the trade deadline day were based around gaining draft capital as we go into the rebuild, using and building around the pieces that we have of Sam Howell. So he basically indirectly said, look, Sam Howell's going to be here for a while. We need to build around him. We need to fill the holes around him. And he's shown us what he needs to do and is doing what he needs to do to be that quarterback of our team for a couple more years, right? And let's be honest, whether you like the guy or not, we're kind of getting into the point now. I'm going to say, another 3, maybe 4 games is going to answer that question for all the fans and the NFL insiders and everything. That is Sam Howell, our quarterback. So, it's interesting because I personally think Sam is the future at quarterback for this team. That being said, they need to commit to him. And it would be foolish kind of not to hire EB as the head coach or at least retain him in some capacity moving forward for next year. Bieniemy's learning on the fly. Sam Howell's learning on the fly. They've basically only had since June of this year to kind of come together and put that offense together. Look, he's not the genius that Andy Reid was in Kansas City, but he's definitely an offensive guru in mind that Sam Howell is benefiting from, something that, we weren't going to see under Scott Turner, right? So it's definitely, I see it being a good fit for Sam Howell that, having EB as his offensive coordinator, potential head coach can only make Sam Howell better. And I don't put a whole lot of stock in statistics, even though I spout them off week to week because they're cool and they're good to reference and they kind of help build the overall painting of that picture of who a player was, how a game went, who we're facing, yada, yada, yada. But, Sam Howell is the first quarterback for the Washington Commanders franchise, Redskins football team, whatever you want to use, in I think it was 10 years to have 3 back-to-back 300-yard games and so many touchdowns in his rookie season. As Pro Football Focus mentioned earlier yesterday, Sam Howell has made more big-time throws than any quarterback in the NFL this season. Those guys go through and grade players on statistics and different stats of how they performed and the percentages and yada, yada, yada. So, Pro Football Focus basically defines a big time throw as a pass with excellent ball location and timing, generally thrown down the field and or into a tight window. So we know that so far this year, Sam Howell is basically that gunslinger, throwing into tight spots. He did it again against the Patriots. He's done it both games against the Eagles. And, as Pro Football Focus dubs it, big time throws so far in 2023, Sam Howell leads that with 22. Kind of shows you where and what company he's with. Tua has 21. Jalen Hurts has 20. Matt Stafford, who's now on IR, has 19, and Josh Allen has 18. So it's kind of interesting to see where he kind of fits up and has. Sam Howell is already in top 10 quarterback so far in the season. Take it for what it's worth in yardage, in completions, and pass attempts, and everything. So the potential for this kid to have above average to be top 15 quarterback in the NFL is there, right? And as Paul says, it's the same thing that Kenny Pickett's going through. First season, new verbiage, scheme, new offensive coordinator, that he had in Matt Canada there in Pittsburgh. And, it's his first year, first 9 games, and won last year as a starter, right? Which I don't even really count last year because of the way the teams were and everything like that against the Dallas Cowboys last week of the season. So to me, I kind of always told myself, look, let's give Sam Howell 10 games this season, see how he does, and we'll go from there. Well, we're not far from that 10th game, right? So, and he's done everything that he needs to do. We know he's going to make mistakes. We know he's going to turn the ball over. We've made some adjustments and changes to the offensive line that has certainly helped him out over the last 2 weeks. And we're starting to see that pay off. And I really think that if we can just progress even better offensively, a better tight end, another tight end, some more offensive line help, we can basically turn Sam Howell into a consistent top 12 quarterback year after year that at least gets us to the playoffs. Are we going to win a Super Bowl? Probably not. Are we going to, be that annual NFC title game contender? Probably not yet. But we have the potential to be, hey, are we going to sneak in as a playoff spot? Probably not. You know what I mean? So, but we know it's not going to be this year. It's going to be 2024, maybe. Are we more realistically looking at 2025? That's probably where we're going to go. But, like I said, if you take out the sacks for how many times this guy's been sacked, I think it's like 43, 44 times so far this season. He's putting together a really star-studded season already, right? He's got over 1,500 yards. I think he's already close to or approaching the 2,000-yard mark. He has more touchdowns than half the quarterbacks in the league. He has less interceptions than half the quarterbacks in the league. And the kid's only played 10 games in his NFL career. So he's doing great with where he needs to go. And I think that, the last time we've had something like this was a la Kirk Cousins 3 years ago. And, he didn't quite, he gave you the stats, gave you a consistency at the quarterback position, didn't necessarily win the big games when it had to. Hopefully Sam Howell can do that, for our team moving forward. And we kind of go with where we go now, right? Look, Paul thinks that next year's quarterback, it's only Caleb Williams fitting that true Bieniemy scheme. Stick with Howell and fill the pieces around him. O-line is definitely a need, right? And I wholeheartedly agree with that. Look, I feel like this is the first time where we don't need to go into next year's draft talking quarterback. We need to go into next year's draft that the first round draft pick should be nothing but the best offensive lineman on the draft board, wherever our pick is, right? Second pick, I wouldn't even be surprised if we go offensive line again, but second round, actually, I guess essentially the second pick, which would be the Bears' second round pick, which would be an end of the first round pick, needs to be linebacker. And then maybe third round would be whether it's, from San Francisco or probably our own third round pick, which would be higher than San Francisco's, would be, maybe another offensive line piece again, and make that build and do that. So it'll be interesting to see where we go from here. So, like I said, it gives us nothing short of stuff to look at and talk about over the next, how many weeks going in. Look, I've seen fans that have already given up this season and are doing mock drafts for whatever reason. Who knows? Look, there's a lot of football left. We basically are coming down the second half of the season. We do have a week 14 bye, and it's kind of interesting to see what happens, how we progress the rest of the season. I think we're still going to finish in that 500 window just because we do have some really tough games coming up. Like I said, we still got to face the Cowboys twice. We still got to play the New York Jets. We still got to play the San Francisco 49ers, as well as the Miami Dolphins. So it'll be super interesting. Look, as Paul says, Joe Alt, the All-American left tackle at Notre Dame. Look, man, if that kid's still on the board when we pick in the first round, I will gladly take any offensive line help. I haven't really looked at who is coming out yet in the draft for next year. Probably once we get to Christmas, maybe even in the new year, then I'll start looking at that and kind of, saying, hey, who's out there? Where do we think we're going to finish in the season to do draft picks and kind of go from there. So it'll be super interesting to see how this team kind of evolves over the next year to the beginning of the 2024 season. So with that being said, we're going to wind off for tonight. Next week, we will be back. Once again, we're going to do the Seahawks recap, see how we fared with our team out in Seattle, out on the West Coast, and kind of preview the following week's game, who we play the New York Giants, which coming off of their basically tragic loss of Daniel Jones as he tore his ACL this past Sunday, and where they go, and looking at who's going to be quarterback for them moving forward, and whether or not we have a chance to hopefully not tie them again, but come out with a victory and not a second loss as we play them for the second time this season, and kind of some other news and tidbits as we move forward. So with that, we're going to sign off for tonight. Have a good night. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And remember to like, subscribe, and check out all of our shows at Out of the Box Sports Entertainment. We have something for everybody every week. Just follow our links, follow our shares on all of our social media outlets, and find something that fits you and your team. Have a good night.